Lila Matthews was 31, a waitress at Benny's Grill, a fading roadside diner tucked between a bait shop and a car repair yard on the outskirts of Harper, Wyoming. She had worked there for 7 years, long enough that her feet knew every creak in the floorboards. Each morning, she tied on her pale yellow apron, swept her blonde hair into a loose bun, and greeted the regulars with a soft smile that never quite reached her tired green eyes. Lila lived alone in a one-room apartment above the hardware store, her life filled with quiet routines. She'd once dreamed of leaving Harper for the city, but dreams had a way of shrinking when bills piled up and family faded. Her parents were gone. A brother she barely spoke to lived 3 states away. And most of her days passed in the slow rhythm of refilling coffee cups, jotting down orders, and sweeping the same familiar crumbs off the same worn tables. It was on a Wednesday morning in late September when Lila noticed him. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, small for his age, with shaggy, dark hair that fell into his eyes, and a battered green backpack that looked far too heavy for his thin frame. He slipped into the back corner booth, always the same one, and ordered only water. He sat quietly, tracing patterns on the table with his fingertip, his shoulders tense as if bracing for some invisible blow. The first few days, Lila let it go. Kids sometimes wandered in. Maybe he was waiting for a parent, but no one ever came. Day after day, he sat, sipping water, eyes darting to the door every few minutes, as if afraid someone might walk in and end whatever fragile peace he had. The 5th day, Lila made a decision. She brought him a plate of pancakes, setting it down with a casual shrug. "Kitchen made too many," she murmured. "Be ashamed to waste them." The boy looked up sharply, suspicion flickering across his face, but hunger softened his hesitation. He ate quickly, almost mechanically, barely tasting, eyes still scanning the room. When he finished, he pushed the plate forward and gave the smallest nod. Thanks. It became their routine. Each morning, Lila accidentally brought him extra food. Scrambled eggs one day, oatmeal the next. He never asked for anything, never offered his name. But slowly, cautiously, his eyes began to meet hers, just for a second longer each day. She didn't pry, didn't press. She knew that sometimes the best way to help someone was simply to be there. No questions asked. Her. Coworkers noticed, of course. "Feeding strays now, Lila?" joked Pete, the grill cook, wiping his hands on a stained rag. "You're too soft-hearted." But there was no malice in his voice, just the weary pragmatism of someone who'd worked too many hard years. Lila didn't respond. She just kept bringing the plates. She'd been hungry once, too. She knew the sharp, hollow ache that settled in your chest when the world looked the other way. By the 2nd week, a few regulars began to murmur. "Why's that kid always here? Where are his parents?" But Lila ignored them. She was focused on making sure the boy left each morning with a full belly and maybe, just maybe, a little less weight on his small shoulders. And then, one morning, everything changed. It was the morning of October 10th. The Wyoming sky hung, heavy with gray clouds, and the chill in the air hinted at an early snow. Lila arrived at Benny's Grill just before dawn, as usual. She unlocked the door, flicked on the neon open sign, and began the familiar rhythm of setting up, brewing coffee, wiping counters, arranging sugar shakers. At precisely 7:15 a.m., the boy arrived, slipping into his usual booth like a shadow. Lila greeted him with her quiet smile and soon placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him. "Kitchen mixed up the orders again," she said softly, the same small lie they both pretended to believe. Today, though, something was off. The boy's eyes darted even more anxiously than usual, and his thin hands trembled slightly as he gripped his fork. He kept glancing at the window, at the door, at the street beyond. Lila's chest tightened. She'd seen that look before, the look of someone who's waiting for the world to fall apart. "Everything okay, honey?" she asked gently when she refilled his water. The boy flinched, then quickly masked it with a tight nod. "Yeah, but..." Lila knew better. An hour later, as the diner buzzed with the morning rush, truckers, farmers, shop owners, a sudden hush fell over the room. The low murmur of conversations died. Lila looked up from the counter, frowning. Through the large diner windows, she saw them, 4 large black SUVs pulling into the gravel lot. Government plates, tinted windows, the vehicles parked in a precise semicircle, blocking the entrance. Men in dark suits and earpieces emerged, moving briskly to secure the perimeter. Customers craned their necks to stare, the tension in the room sharp and electric. The diner door swung open, the bell jingling softly, a strangely delicate sound against the backdrop of such a commanding presence. A tall man entered, flanked by two others. His tailored coat and crisp posture marked him immediately as someone important, but it was the insignia on his lapel, the eagle and stars emblem of the U.S. military, that sent a ripple of stunned whispers through the diner. Lila's hands froze mid-motion, coffee pot trembling slightly. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice calm despite the pounding of her heart. The man's eyes were steady, his expression serious but not unkind. "I'm looking for Miss Lila Matthews." The entire diner turned as one, eyes landing on her. She set the coffee, pot down carefully. "That's me," she said quietly. The man extended a hand. "Colonel Nathan Hale, U.S. Special Operations Command." Lila's stomach dropped. She glanced instinctively toward the boy's booth, but it was empty. The backpack, the plate, even the boy himself were gone, like a whisper fading from the room. Colonel Hale followed her gaze, then offered a faint, almost apologetic smile. "You've been feeding a boy named Eli Carter, ma'am." Lila's breath caught. "Eli? His name was Eli." "Yes," she whispered. "He comes here every morning." Colonel Hale nodded. His father, Sergeant Marcus Carter, was recently deployed overseas. Eli's mother left shortly after. "We've been searching for Eli for 3 weeks. Lila's knees felt weak. She gripped the counter to steady herself. "We didn't know where he was staying, how he was surviving," Hale continued. "But Eli's letters to his father mentioned a kind woman at a diner who gave him breakfast every day, a woman who never asked questions, who made sure he was okay." Tears pricked Lila's eyes as the weight of his words sank in. She had only seen a hungry child. She had never imagined the full story, the grief, the loneliness, the survival. "Colonel." Hale reached into his coat and pulled out a carefully folded envelope. "Sergeant Carter wanted you to have this." Lila's fingers shook as she took it. Around her, the diner sat in stunned silence. Every face turned toward her. The waitress, who had lived quietly, invisibly, and whose small acts of kindness had rippled further than she ever knew. Outside, the SUVs waited. Inside, Lila stood frozen, the letter trembling in her hands. The envelope in Lila's trembling hands felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. She stared at it, heart hammering in her chest, as Colonel Hale waited quietly. Around her, the Waitress diner was still. The clatter of forks, the scrape of coffee mugs, even the hum of conversation had died completely. With a slow breath, Lila unfolded the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, the handwriting steady but worn. The words pressed deep into the page as if the writer had gripped the pen too tightly. "Dear Miss Lila, if you're reading this, it means I wasn't able to make it home. I want you to know that for months, you were the only reason my son Eli had the strength to face each day. He told me about you in every letter, how you'd bring him food, how you never asked questions, how you made him feel seen when the rest of the world didn't. You didn't know you were saving my boy, but you were. You gave him warmth when his world had gone cold, dignity when he felt small, and kindness when he had no one. You didn't owe us anything, but you gave him everything anyway. Thank you for being the stranger who cared when no one else did. You kept my son safe. You kept my heart alive halfway across the world. With deepest gratitude, Sergeant Marcus Carter." By the time she reached the end, Lila's tears blurred the words. She pressed a hand to her mouth, choking back a sob. Colonel Hale stepped forward slightly, his voice low and respectful. "Sergeant Carter spoke about you in his final dispatch. He made us promise. If anything happened, we'd find the woman at the diner. We'd tell her how much she mattered." Behind him, one by one, the other soldiers entered the diner. They moved with the precise, disciplined silence of men trained for war, but their faces were soft with something more human: gratitude, sorrow, respect. Then, something no one in the room expected happened. Colonel Hale straightened, snapped to attention, and gave Lila a formal salute. Every soldier behind him did the same. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Pete, the gruff grill cook, set down his spatula and wiped at his eyes. Customers rose slowly from their seats, standing in quiet respect. Even the ones who'd once muttered about the freeloading kid or the wasted food stood with their heads bowed. Lila felt herself shaking as she looked out across the diner. She had never wanted recognition, never expected it. But now, as the weight of it all settled on her shoulders, she realized something profound. Sometimes the smallest kindness, the unnoticed gesture, the unremarkable routine could mean the world to someone else. And in that moment, the quiet waitress from a dusty Wyoming diner stood taller, holding a folded letter that carried more honor than any medal. Colonel Hale's voice softened. "He's safe now, Miss Matthews. Eli's with his grandparents in Montana, but we wanted you to know you mattered." Lila gave a trembling nod, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." Outside, the wind stirred the American flag above the diner door. Inside, a room full of people stood together, reminded that sometimes the simplest act, feeding a hungry child, could ripple across lives and continents. That evening, long. After the soldiers had gone, the SUVs had rolled out of the dusty lot and the last customer had left. Lila sat alone in the diner. The closed sign hung in the window. The chairs were flipped onto the tables, and the only light came from the small lamp above the counter. She sat in the booth where Eli had always sat. His booth, she now realized. She ran her fingers across the worn surface, tracing the faint scratches and dents that marked where a small hand had once rested, where a battered backpack had once slumped. The letter from Sergeant Carter lay open on the table in front of her. Lila read it again, and again, each word sinking deeper into her chest. She remembered Eli's quiet thank you, his nervous glances at the door, his careful, watchful eyes. How had she not seen the full weight he was carrying? Her mind replayed every morning she'd served him. The mornings when she had thought she was just giving away an extra plate of food. But it hadn't just been breakfast. It had been survival. It had been a lifeline. The sound of footsteps startled her. She looked up to see Pete, the old grill cook, standing at the doorway, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered. "Figured you couldn't either." Lila managed a faint smile. "Yeah." Pete came over, lowering himself slowly into the seat across from her. He glanced at the letter, then back at her. "You know, I gave you a hard time about feeding that kid," he said gruffly. "Didn't see the point. Figured it was just extra work. But you were right." Lila shook her head. "I didn't know, Pete. I just didn't want him to be hungry." "Exactly," Pete said. "That's why you were right." For a long time, they sat there in silence. Two people who had worked side by side for years, suddenly realizing they had shared something much bigger than just shifts and paychecks. The next morning, when Lila unlocked the diner, something new was taped to the front window. A simple sign, written in Pete's careful block letters. "Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry." Lila's throat tightened. She ran her fingers over the words, blinking back sudden tears. By noon, the town had heard the story. The soldiers, the letter, the waitress who had fed the quiet boy. People she'd known for years but barely spoken to stopped by, leaving envelopes, gift cards, donations. A local news crew called. A church offered to help set up a meal fund for kids in need. But through it all, Lila stayed quiet, humble. She hadn't done it for attention. She hadn't done it for praise. She had done it because she'd once been hungry too. And somewhere out there, a boy named Eli was no longer sitting in a corner booth, watching the door, waiting for the world to forget him. The days that followed brought more change to Benny's Grill than Lila had ever expected. By the end of the week, small envelopes stuffed with cash quietly appeared on the counter. Farmers, teachers, even the sheriff left tips larger than any she'd ever seen. A local church group dropped off a check labeled "For the Kids," Pete. And the rest of the kitchen crew started setting aside portions every morning. Just in case plates. And soon it wasn't just Eli's old booth that filled. Word spread through the small town, and new faces arrived. A single mother with 2 kids, an elderly man living on Social Security, a teenager who worked nights and sometimes skipped meals. And Lila, she just kept doing what she always did. Pouring coffee, smiling softly, slipping an extra piece of toast onto a plate when no one was looking. But inside, something had shifted. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Montana. Lila recognized the careful handwriting even before she opened it. "Dear Miss Layla, Grandma and Grandpa told me you got Dad's letter. I'm doing better now. I started at my new school, and I even joined the library club. I miss him every day, but I remember what you always said when you set down my plate. Eat up, honey. You need your strength. I think maybe you gave me more strength than just food. Thank you for that. Love, Eli." Lila pressed the letter to her chest, closing her eyes. She didn't know if she'd ever see Eli again, but somehow she knew she'd carry him with her. his memory, his quiet bravery, his gratitude. That night, she placed Eli's letter beside Sergeant Carter's, tucking them into a small frame she hung just behind the counter. Not for show, not for praise, but as a personal reminder of what mattered. Customers noticed, of course. Some asked, most didn't, but a few would pause, reading the framed words, and walk away wiping their eyes. The diner's reputation began to spread beyond town. Soldiers on leave stopped in to shake Leela's hand, some leaving military patches or coins on the counter as tokens of thanks. Families traveling cross-country made detours just to sit in the little booth where the boy once sat. One evening, as Lila prepared to close, Pete came up beside her, his hands tucked deep in his apron pockets. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said softly. "You turned this little diner into something bigger, Lila." She gave a small, humble smile. "I didn't do anything special, Pete. I just fed a hungry kid." Pete shook his head. "Sometimes that's the most special thing of all." Outside, the Wyoming sky stretched wide and pale, the wind rattling the old diner sign. Inside, beneath, the quiet glow of the lights, Lila finished wiping the counters, the faint trace of a smile on her face, the weight of 2 letters forever tucked close to her heart. Nearly a year had passed. Benny's Grill still stood on the corner of the old highway, its faded neon sign flickering stubbornly through wind, rain, and snow. But inside, something had changed. Something that couldn't be seen from the outside, but was felt by every soul who stepped through its door. The diner had become a symbol in Harper, Wyoming. Not for fancy food or big city fame, but for something simpler. No one left hungry. It was now known as a place where veterans found warmth, where struggling families found a meal, and where the townspeople, quietly, had come together to care for their own. One cold March morning, just as the sun slipped over the horizon, a silver pickup truck rolled into the lot. Lila, wiping down the counter, glanced up, and her breath caught. The boy climbing down from the passenger seat was taller now, his shaggy hair trimmed neatly, a nervous smile pulling at his lips. Beside him stood an older couple, his grandparents. And stepping out from the driver's side was Colonel Nathan Hale. Lila hurried to the door, her heart pounding. Eli froze when he saw her, then broke into a grin. "Miss Lila!" he called, his voice cracking slightly with excitement. She knelt just in time to catch him in a tight, tearful hug. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Eli pulled back, grinning, up at her. "I'm taller now," he said proudly. Lila laughed softly, brushing his hair back. "You sure are, honey." Colonel Hale approached, offering a warm handshake. "We wanted to bring him back," he explained quietly. "He's been asking." Inside the diner, the regulars watched with quiet smiles as Lila led Eli and his grandparents to his old booth. Pete emerged from the kitchen, pretending to grumble, but quickly sliding a plate of pancakes onto the table. The town didn't need a big announcement. No one clapped, no one made speeches. But the moment mattered, because here, in this little diner on the edge of nowhere, a small circle had closed. Later that night, long after Eli and his family had left, Leela stood outside, beneath the quiet stars. She slipped a small object from her pocket, the challenge coin she'd kept since that day the SUVs arrived. She ran her thumb over its engraved words, "Semper Memor," always remembering. She thought about Eli, about Sergeant Carter, about all the unseen struggles people carried through their days. She thought about how little it took, a plate of food, a quiet smile, to remind someone they weren't invisible. As the wind stirred her hair, Lila smiled softly to herself. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need applause. She just needed to know that today, someone had been fed. That today, someone had been seen. And that was enough, if you believe small acts can change lives, even when no one's watching. Share this story. Let someone know they're not alone. Because kindness, even in the quietest corners, can echo farther than you'll ever know.